Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's a panel discussion. I want to thank everyone for being here as part of our panel. You'll meet them all in just a minute. I want to thank everybody for attending and being here today. We've got a big plan here on this topic of getting to zero harm for patients and staff with DEIA and psychological safety concepts. So we've got 90 minutes planned out. We'd be happy to take your questions, and we have a Q&A period as part of the agenda for the time here. Again, I want to thank Value Capture and their leadership team for sponsoring this event, not just providing the Zoom account, but more importantly, sponsoring and supporting the idea of having these conversations and sharing the topics and bringing up the points that everyone here has done through the blog series and through today's webinar here. Before I turn things over to my co-host, Deondra Wardelle, I want to ask people, if you're going to submit questions, please feel free to do so anytime, but please use the Q&A function. So you can use the chat, but for questions that you would like us to address, please do use the Q&A. Indicate, if you would, if the question is directed toward a specific person or people or to the group. So thank you in advance for your participation there. And Deondra, thank you for your collaboration and leadership on this whole series. Let me turn things over to you.
Thank you. So thank you to everyone who joined us today from all over the world, whether you are attending live or watching the recording. We are so thankful for your presence. And to echo Mark, to Value Capture, thank you so much for your collaboration and active partnership. We have senior leaders of the Value Capture team who have been an integral part of the success of this series, and we'll introduce you to them more formally later. And Mark, it's always a joy to work with you and collaborate with you on these root cause racism series. And the purpose and goal of what we try, or no, not what we try, we're doing it, of what we do with this work is we combine continuous improvement methodologies and the steps, and within Value Capture talks about going through the plan, do, study, adjust cycle. And we want to apply those same concepts to address those big, audacious challenges that we find in the world, including racism. And so with this particular series, we are all talking about something that is very near and dear to our hearts as those of us who have served in different capacities or are currently serving in different capacities as it relates to the healthcare industry, or even the case of those who have been to the doctor for a checkup, or who've had surgery, or who have had to take a loved one for those checkups. Any way that we are all connected with healthcare, we are here for one purpose, and we want to examine actions, steps, things that we can do today to ensure that those who work in healthcare environments, that they are safe to speak up and talk about the resources that they need to be successful in doing the work that they've been called to do, that they have a heart and passion for. And for those of us on the receiving end, as individuals, and again, as those of us who are caregivers for loved ones, ensuring that when we are in a position to receive care, that we receive that care regardless of fill in the blank. And so with this particular series, what we are offering is an opportunity for dialogue and discussion about creating physical and psychological safe spaces using continuous improvement, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility methods to ensure that people know that they belong, and psychological safety concepts, not just saying, oh, we declare this a safe space and that makes it so. We want to be intentional and to develop and cultivate a culture of safety. And so with that, I've highlighted and talked overall about the purpose of the series. And if you have not yet had an opportunity to read my blog, I invite you to read that, Envisioning Systematically Safe Spaces. But if I could summarize my blog with one quote, I would use the quote that appears on the psychological safety page for Value Capture. And the quote reads, "Perfect safety for everyone in healthcare, patients, staff, visitors, and contractors is a fundamental right." And that's what this series is centered on. So what we hope is from you reading the blogs and what you'll learn today during our conversations is that we'll move beyond posts and statements and look at policy changes and ways to create new systems and structure to support safety, inclusion, and belonging for healthcare staff and patients. Now, as I've already shared, this webinar will be recorded. So those who are attending, you will receive the link. In addition to that, towards the end of the session today, each of the blog participants will share key takeaways and calls to action from their particular blogs. And we've compiled all that information in an infographic, something that's handy for you to reference, and that will be included in the email that you receive with the recording. So without further ado, I want to introduce these dynamic people who look so fabulous in your blue, who are joining me today for this discussion. And I'll introduce them in the order of the appearance of their blogs. So first up, we have Mark Graban. He is an author extraordinaire. He's an award-winning author. And if you have not had an opportunity to check out his book, Lean Hospitals, Improving Quality, Patient Safety, and Employee Engagement, please do so. So it's so much helpful information. And he also has an upcoming book. I'm really excited about this. It's coming up next month. The Mistakes That Make Us, Cultivating a Culture of Learning and Innovation. So Mark, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you.
Gerald Harris. Gerald is Vice President of Advisory Services and is responsible for business development at Value Capture. So as I mentioned earlier, not only is Value Capture sponsoring, but Value Capture leaders are actively involved in this series, and that says a lot. So Gerald has over 25 years of leadership experience. He has successfully led large-scale lean transformations in a number of industries, including healthcare. He's worked with clients to implement lean manufacturing and enterprise improvement principles that resulted in significant cost savings, increased productivity, and improved quality. That's huge. And Gerald is passionate about promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accountability in healthcare. So everyone give Gerald a round of applause. So we're so glad you're here. Okay. And then next we have one of my new best friends, Alan Wikler, just a dynamic individual. Alan is a clinical psychologist and lean practitioner with a deep interest in healthcare quality, safety, and improvement. He's worked at the VA New York Harbor System for 31 years, first as a clinician and administrator in their substance abuse program, then as Deputy Performance Improvement Manager, during which time he earned a black belt in lean performance improvement and then created. So not only did he earn the black belt, he put it to good use and ran the hospital systems redesign and improvement program until his retirement last year. He currently writes about healthcare performance improvement and patient safety, focusing on psychological safety in healthcare. Alan, we are so overjoyed to have you with us today. Okay, next we have my good friend and sister, Debbie Sears Barnard. Debbie is a certified Maxwell leadership team member. She is based in Dubai, UAE. So thank you for being up with us. She serves clients globally through coaching, speaking, training, and consulting. She does it all. And her goal is to co-create a world that works better for all. That's what connects us as sisters. That goal. She leverages her expertise in lean systems thinking, strategy deployment, executive leadership development, and continuous improvement to assist leaders in gaining clarity and enhance strategic thinking to close the gap between knowledge and action, creating inclusive, psychologically safe workplaces where everyone can thrive. Debbie, we're so happy to have you with us. Yay, Debbie. And last but not least, Ken Segel. Ken, in his role as CEO, he is the CEO of Value Capture LLC. Ken provides support to CEOs of healthcare organizations dedicated to eliminating injuries and improving quality to dramatically raise the clinical and financial performance of the entire institution. Prior to helping form Value Capture, Ken served as a founding director of the Pittsburgh Regional Healthcare Initiative, PRHI. And PRHI achieved Best in Nation for regional results in the elimination of several classes of risk for patients. So Ken, we are overjoyed to have you with us. And for those who are attending this webinar, as you can see, our panelists are well-versed in this topic. So again, we are confident you're going to walk away with some good information. So without further ado, the format of how things will work today, I first want to engage the leaders at Value Capture and talk more about this collaboration with Value Capture and root cause racism and what it means for us and what it is that we hope you will get out of this series as a result of reading the blogs and participating with us in this webinar and asking your questions. And then each blog author will give you a high-level summary about their blog, and we'll have some dialogue after that. And then we'll have time for Q&A. So again, as Mark indicated earlier, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to those questions. And then we'll wrap up with closing thoughts, points to ponder for each of you that will be included in the infographic that will be shared later. So right now, I'm really excited because I get to play Oprah Winfrey and have a miniature talk show within this webinar. And, you know, I get to talk to Ken and Gerald and Mark as leaders at Value Capture and those who support the work of Value Capture. And Ken, I would like to start with you because, you know, all of this came about from a conversation in the chat that we all had together. And so, you know, Value Capture is known for partnering with healthcare executives to improve systems, embed a learning culture, and allow everyone to solve problems at root cause while reducing waste and harm. From your perspective, what is the connection between the Zero Harm Root Cause Racism series and how Value Capture helps clients, patients, and the community improve safety and reduce harm?
Thanks, Deondra, and it's an honor to be here and learn with you as we've been learning not just through the series but beyond from you and the colleagues on the webinar here and those who are watching. Many people we've learned from. It's great to have you all together. You summarized it really in your question, and I'll just say it starts with our mission of habitual excellence, starting with safety, and safety being, we believe, something you can't achieve habitual systematic excellence without. And then, and our mission within that, our vision within that is healthcare without harm, weight, or waste. And, you could say it either that it's impossible to achieve that vision without deeply grappling with the causes of why those things exist today, including the causes rooted in racism and the other elements that we'll talk about today. So it's impossible. And you can also say the other, that these frameworks that we're exploring together offer the path to actually do those incredibly bold aspirational things that sort of make us more of who we want to be. And so from, understanding our current state in a more detailed way and the different experiences of different groups of people for different reasons, understanding the why, the real cause of the challenges. And then, it comes down to problem solving effectively together across large organizations. And that's very dependent, doing that well, rapidly, with a full heart, really making sure we have the virtue of everybody's best thinking to try to accomplish hard things. You can't do it without really grappling openly with what we're talking about and capitalizing on the frameworks in a very hopeful but serious way that we're talking about.
I love that, in a very hopeful but serious way, because you have to have hope and heart to do this work and be committed to seeing those changes come to fruition. Thank you for that, Ken. So to Gerald, as I shared earlier, you have extensive experience leading large-scale lean transformations in manufacturing, healthcare, and other industries. And as an executive leader, what do you hope healthcare executives will glean from the blogs and this panel discussion about zero harm?
Well, thank you, Deondra. There are, in my opinion, several key insights we could actually glean from, these types of blogs and our panel discussion. And the first being the importance of a patient safety culture. Zero harm blogs, they emphasize the significance of creating a culture of patient safety within healthcare. So executives should really take and understand that patient safety is not just a program or a set of initiatives. It's a fundamental aspect of healthcare delivery. And by fostering this culture that prioritizes patient safety, executives can really promote a shared responsibility for identifying and addressing potential risks and continuously improving their safety practices. There are a couple other things I'd like to bring to mind, and that's really learning from real world examples. And I think you will have seen in some of the blogs some shared examples. And you can get, that by studying these examples, you can gain insights into other organizations and how they've implemented lean principles to improve patient safety outcomes. There's also, this the application of lean principles and lean methodologies have proven to really be effective in healthcare. And these zero harm blogs really can provide you with insights to how lean principles and tools can be specifically applied in healthcare settings.
Yeah, Gerald, that I agree with you 100%. And I know that there are people attending the webinar with varying experiences about lean and continuous improvement. But, the two main components or the fundamentals of lean and continuous improvement is about continuously improving processes and demonstrating respect for people. And so what better place to mobilize lean than within healthcare? And, you talked about shared examples. In the blogs, there were a number of examples that people were able to expound on, because oftentimes people need to see, has this been done before, and what are some of those examples, which, takes me to the question that I want to ask you, Mark. I know that, your experience, you've had extensive experience serving as an advisor in a number of healthcare environments. And I'm curious, based on when you've been in those environments and, your experience and observations, what makes it difficult for healthcare professionals to acknowledge problems openly?
Well, thank you for that question, Deondra. And it's not, I know you're not blaming them, but I'll emphasize, as I always do, it's not the fault of those professionals for not speaking up. I know we're in agreement here, yourself included, with your experience, with continuous improvement methodologies and culture change. That comes back to culture. And I think we would all agree here, individuals want to do safe, high quality work, especially so in healthcare. They want to speak up, and I'll have a chance to share more about this, kind of summarizing my blog post. But what prevents people from speaking up, or what prevents them from speaking up a second time, is the reaction that they get. If it's been demonstrated through their own experience or what they've heard from others that they're going to be punished in some way, or even ignored and marginalized, doesn't reinforce the need to speak up and the psychological safety required to do so. So I will have other opportunities to delve into that, but I think that's my high level response. It's not a matter, when people choose to speak up, it's not a matter of character or courage on their part. It's a function of culture. And that means, it goes back to this question of how everybody, including their leaders, is interacting with them.
Yeah. Mark, I think that's a perfect opportunity for us to get to the section where everyone is talking about their blogs. And I would like to start with your blog. It's entitled, Organizations Cannot Solve Problems Unless Leaders Admit Them and Make It Safe for Others to Speak Up. And just like you said earlier, this is not finger pointing. We're not blaming. What we want to do is we want to have the conversation about how these spaces can be safe for everyone, leaders included, to be able to do what needs to do to make changes. So Mark, share with us more about about your blog.
Yeah, well, thank you, Deondra. If organizations are going to encourage healthcare professionals, clinicians, workers in different types of jobs, clinical or non-clinical, I think it starts with leaders and senior leaders modeling the behaviors that they want to see. Mm-hmm. I think that starts with speaking honestly and with candor about serious problems that are faced in healthcare. And that includes, patients being harmed or dying at unacceptably high rates, different estimates, because we don't have great data. We have to rely on estimates. Estimates say, it's the third leading cause of death in the United States, and per capita rates in different countries are similar. It screams systemic problem. This is not just an American problem. And then on the beyond patients, healthcare professionals, data shows, are injured at rates far higher than industries that people might perceive as dangerous, like mining or manufacturing. So to get people to feel like they can use their voice, that they can speak up about problems or risks, it's really on leaders to try to reduce the two primary barriers, the fear factor and the futility factor. Like I said, if people fear punishment or they know they have been, they'll keep quiet. They'll protect themselves. That's natural. And even if the fear factor is reduced, I think people will stop speaking up if they think doing so isn't worth their effort. That's the futility factor. So, thankfully, leaders can do things, can take action to help increase the level of psychological safety that people feel. And Tim Clark, author of The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, defines this as, a social condition, a culture, an environment where people feel like, and we choose, how do we feel individually? Do we feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo, all without the fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way? So leaders can't just speak this into being. Say, well, this is now a safe space. You should feel safe to speak up. It's not that easy, but leaders can set the tone, not just through encouraging people to speak up, but through their actions. So leaders can model what Clark would call vulnerable acts, admitting a mistake, saying when we don't know, when we could be wrong, or when we were wrong, setting that example, and then rewarding vulnerable acts when people follow our lead. So, I want to give a shout out to Ken Segel here. Mm-hmm. In his blog post yesterday was modeling vulnerable acts, reflecting and sharing mistakes and gaps and being honest about, the journey to do better. And then when a leader like Ken or in a healthcare organization does that, team members might test the waters and try doing the same. So, it really comes back to leaders not just encouraging, but again, modeling and rewarding behaviors that might seem risky or vulnerable. And, in the blog post, I suggest, some questions for people to look at. Are there disparities in patient safety measures and employee safety measures based on demographics? Zero, for everybody. Are those disparities, let's say, for employee safety, caused by the type of work that's being done, which is not an excuse, it's just part of the challenge? Or is it caused, at least in some part, by some employee groups feeling less safe to speak up? So if we were to do surveys about psychological safety, we'd want to first identify gaps in that feeling of perceived psychological safety, because then that would allow us to work on that and flow through into reducing disparities in patient outcomes or employee harm. And what can we do to test and gauge our progress on these important challenges?
Okay. Mark, as I listen to you and talking about the role of leaders, what's the role of hierarchy in understanding who feels psychologically safe? And in addition to that, what can be done to break down some of those hierarchies?
There's a lot of hierarchy, different types of hierarchy. There's hierarchy of leadership rank within an organization. How can we break that down? Within an operating room, for example, there might be professional hierarchies of surgeon and anesthesiologist and nurses and techs. And then there might be hierarchies amongst, let's say, attendings and residents, right? There's different layers and dimensions of hierarchy. But I think those who are higher in that traditional hierarchy need to invite, not just tolerate, but encourage and invite those who are in a lower position of power to speak up, to challenge things. We can't just expect, if people have concerns, they'll speak up. We need to go out of our way to encourage that. And then when people do so, make sure the reaction is one that's rewarding people for accepting that invitation instead of, again, punishing them, or just as bad, ignoring or dismissing the things people do choose to speak up about.
Agreed. Mark, it's one of the things that I really enjoyed so much about the series is how everyone talked about the same topic, but it was a different perspective, and then they're all connected. So like what you were just saying about that invitation from leaders, that invitation for engagement, perfect segue for Gerald's blog. Gerald's blog is titled Respect Every Individual and Engage Them to Achieve a Culture of Safety and Inclusion. So Gerald, I'd like to hear from you. Share more about, what it looks like to demonstrate respect for every individual in spaces like this.
Well, sure. So the overview for my blog, really, I try to explore the transformative potential combining the principles of respecting every individual and engaging them to achieve a culture of safety and inclusion in healthcare by embracing psychological safety, lean principles, and operationalizing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Healthcare organizations, by doing this, can create an environment that actually promotes employee engagement, patient safety, and continuous improvement. My blog was really in, I would say, two parts. One part, the first part was really around the intersection of psychological safety, lean principles, and DEIA. And then part two was really around strategies for creating a culture of safety and inclusion in healthcare. So I wanted to talk about it and then, give people an opportunity to think about what they could do in starting to create the conditions to promote zero harm. So again, in this, I introduced the 4 stages of psychological safety according to Dr. Tim Clark, and Mark touched on that somewhat. And that's really when you talk about inclusion safety and learner safety, contributor safety and challenger safety, and really understanding the lean principle of respect for people. And I think this is not taken as deeply typically when we talk about respect for people. Its significance is not deeply understood. And so I try to delve into that because I know if we look at psychological safety and the respect for people and how they intersect, it actually reinforces the importance of valuing and empowering every individual and driving positive change in any organization, really. So really, and then I talked about, the role of DEIA, because that has to be operationalized. You can't just talk about it. You have to operationalize it. So you've got inclusivity and equity, ensuring that underrepresented groups are actively engaged in this healthcare improvement efforts. And then I talked about strategies around creating a culture of safety and inclusion. And this was really about establishing a safe and supportive environment where people really feel valued and can freely express their ideas. And if you don't have that, you limit innovation and really gaining from people's knowledge that they would hide if they're not comfortable in that position. Fostering a culture of continuous improvement where you encourage experimentation. And oftentimes in healthcare, experimentation, that doesn't sound so good because, hey, everything has to be perfect, but you can set the conditions where you can actually experiment, right? So you can learn from your mistakes and provide resources and staff to drive improvements that are aligned with their interests and strengths. Also addressing our implicit biases. And those are things that we typically look past, but really recognizing and mitigating those through training and education and fostering equitable decision-making processes. And then also I talked a little bit about measuring the progress. And so, you don't know where you are if you're not measuring. And it's important that we actually measure. So really the key takeaway from the blog that I produced was really emphasizing the significance of respecting every individual. And I put the emphasis on every individual and engaging them to foster a culture of safety and inclusion.
And Gerald, hats off to you. Hats and crowns off to you. You did an excellent job of that in your blog, and and how you explained how it was broken down into two pieces. There was so much to learn. If someone was new to psychological safety concepts, you broke those 4 steps down beautifully. And then what I appreciated most was the transition to lean, of giving those practical steps, because when you look at, this psychological safety and demonstrating respect for people, one of the things, no matter the industry, but in healthcare especially, we're trying to understand, how do we get people engaged? How do we get them involved? And between what you talked about with psychological safety concepts, you went into great detail with different components of, what lean represents in terms of demonstrating respect for people, and then bringing in the DEIA piece, because it's so important that people know that they belong, or they will not want to get engaged. So, thank you for, like I said, a brilliant blog. And for those who are watching the webinar, if you have not yet checked out Gerald's blog, it's not too late. The blogs aren't going anywhere. Make sure you read it. And like I said earlier, there is a thread between the blogs. So between Gerald's blog, it was a perfect segue to Alan's blog about improving patient and staff safety with DEI and psychological safety from your vantage point in terms of working in that a hospital space. And so, Alan, please share with us, an overview of your blog.
Okay, I will. And I'll also review the literature a little bit. So I think we all know that hospitals have high numbers of adverse events that harm and kill patients and staff. I think a lot of us are familiar with the landmark 1999 publication by the Institute of Medicine called To Err is Human. And it estimated that a staggering 44 to 90 100,000 Americans die each year as a result of medical errors, and that was a real wake-up call. Despite the wake-up call, we haven't done much better. A more recent study found that among patients who are admitted to hospitals, approximately 1 out of 4 of these admissions will have an adverse event during the course of their stay. And to make matters worse, the safety of healthcare in the United States is measurably worse for minorities. That's what the literature says. Patients from ethnic minority backgrounds may experience disparities in the quality and safety of healthcare they receive, particularly African Americans who have higher rates of hospital-acquired infections and adverse drug events. Women and people of color are underrepresented on hospital boards and among the medical staff. On average, healthcare boards are comprised of 87% white members and 13% people of color. Nearly 3/4 of the members are male, and only 3% are Black women. In contrast, frontline medical staff tend to be disproportionately female and people of color, and are at the greatest risk of injury, particularly during a pandemic like we had. Now, as Mark was talking about, harm can be prevented by staff and patients if they speak up about risks and errors that they suspect or are aware of. However, the Speak Up for Safety campaigns, which you probably are aware of, which have been touted by the World Health Organization and the Joint Commission for the past 20 years, have been largely ineffective for promoting staff or patient safety. And the reason for this, as Mark talked about, is a culture of fear rather than a culture of psychological safety and futility, as he mentioned as well. As he said, staff face criticism or fear they may be fired or simply not heard. Mm-hmm. One experience I had years ago is that a staff at a hospital I just joined said not to make waves because if you report a problem, you are the problem. That's the direct quote. But again, that was a while ago, but these things still happen in cultures of fear. For patients, this fear is really palpable because they place their lives in the hands of the providers that are taking care of them. So it's really understandable. So leaders really need to develop a culture of psychological safety in which everyone in the organization has challenge or safety to speak up about any concern about the quality or safety of their care, and as Mark said, be rewarded for raising that concern. A simple thank you from a person they respect goes a long way to building that trust and keeping the reporting concerns being verbalized and reported. Lack of psychological safety also adversely affects efforts to make the workplace more inclusive. Hiring more people, demographic minorities, to achieve a balance that reflects the larger community is necessary, but it's not sufficient because without that inclusion safety and learner safety and contributor safety, the benefits of having a diverse organization are lost. We don't hear what they have to say and what they have to contribute. So leaders need to cultivate a culture of psychological safety by modeling acts of vulnerability, as Mark mentioned as well, and of humility. Some of the things that they can do very practically is delegating others to run meetings. If they're at a staff conference, it need not be a table where they sit at the head of the table. It can be a round table, which kind of signifies that everybody is equal. The leader should do more listening than talking, practicing active listening. When they talk, they can challenge others or to challenge them. Say, maybe I'm wrong, or I don't know, or maybe someone has a better idea. And to reward others acts of vulnerability by thanking them for their contributions and challenges. So transformation needs to start at the top, at the boardroom, top managerial offices. Managers and members of DEIA boards and committees must assess the degree of psychological safety, as Gerald was talking about, at each of the 4 levels. And actions need to be implemented to increase inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger safety. The result will be better and equitable outcomes and safety for all. And efforts to increase diversion, inclusion, equity, and access for minorities and women will be more effective.
Thank you, Alan. You touched on so many different eye-opening points as you were sharing your blog recap. There was something that stuck out in your blog, and you mentioned it even as you were sharing your recap, that typically, that people of color and other demographic groups are at a greater danger of harm in hospitals. Can you tell us why that's the case?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of reasons. As I touched on, the people who are more managerial tend to be more white, and the people who are actually working most closely with the patients tend to be minorities, people of color, and female, as I mentioned. And it all comes back to what's happening during those contacts. The frontline staff that are primarily Black women and other minorities, they're doing a lot of bending and lifting with the patients. They're pushing the beds and gurneys around from the ER to the OR to where patients are getting tested. And that results in more sprains and strains and pain. They're also in close contact with the patients and get more infections. They're rounding on an hourly basis. They're passing medication during the course of their tour. They're helping patients with toileting and other ADLs. And so they have a greater risk of getting those hospital-acquired infections. There's also the people that clean the beds, who they're in contact with the surfaces, and even though they wear PPE, handling the sheets, and there's protocols for that, but one slip and they end up having a healthcare-acquired infection.
So, it's definitely, now is the time to revisit and take another look at what it is we do in these healthcare spaces, especially those in positions of leadership. And, Debbie, you have such an interesting blog title, Beyond Yes, But Leadership, 10 Steps to Achieve Zero Harm. Debbie, tell us more about, what it is that, these steps, how is it that we can help leaders get to this place of zero harm?
So Deondra, I chose that title because I used to annoyingly say to my colleagues in one of the hospitals that I worked in Canada, where I was the vice president for process improvement and quality and patient safety, I would sometimes listen to the dialogue at the table and I would say, okay, I've heard enough, yes, but now what are we gonna do? So I started the anchoring for my blog is really a challenge to leaders. And as Alan said, he mentioned change starts from the top, but the thoughts that I presented is really for leaders at all levels, because ideally change starts from the top, but many organizations' transformation has come from the middle. So it's leaders at all levels that really need to start with thinking. And I use a quote by Martin Luther King in the blog and I'm going to actually look to the side and read it. Really, do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking? There's almost a universal quest for easy answers half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think. And I think in the world that we live in with the apps, ChatGPT, all of the easy things that we can go to, that unfortunately in healthcare, sometimes we are looking for the 10 easy steps. So that's another reason why I use that title, because there's no easy steps. This is a hard, big, audacious challenge. But those of us that label ourselves as leaders, the privilege of sitting in those seats, whether you're leader of a unit or leader of chairman of the board, is that we have said, I'm stepping forward to handle those big challenges. So the way I formatted the blog flows is really about, we have the knowledge, because in healthcare, we have amazing researchers that continually provide us with information about how to care for our patients. We have amazing management and social science scholars who provide us with evidence-based, informed solutions or directions on how we lead better in organization, how we pull our teams better effectively. So it's not that we don't know or we don't have the knowledge. And I cited some of those at places that you can go, like the Joint Commission, like the American Hospital Association, like the World Health, and of course, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. We know the challenge. Alan and I think started off in a very similar place. We've been working at this for a long time. And since the landmark study was released, when we go back, first it was 5 years, 10 years, 20 plus years now, we are still grappling with some of the same issue. So the answer, the question to all of us as leaders is, when is the right time for us to start to use some of the knowledge that we have? So the work really is, and I listed 10 things, but it's really coupled into 4 buckets. And the first bucket is about organizational mindset. And so how engaged are leaders? Because in my experience, I've had times when leaders want to delegate their responsibility to some quality lead or some other lead, and then they report up. But this is the one thing that at the senior most level of the organizations, boards and senior leaders, and then of course the others, must look themselves in the mirror and say, this is my responsibility. That's a mindset piece. And then we must hold ourselves accountable. Often senior leaders talk about holding others accountable, but this is something where we must look in the mirror and say, how are we holding ourselves accountable to use the knowledge that we have, use the resources that we have to be serious about reducing harm? The next part of the blog, I talk about having a shared vision, which means that we have clarity about what we want to do and that we're looking intently at, are we creating a culture where our staff are safe, where our patients are safe, where our community is safe? And one of the hallmark things, and I think almost every person so far has talked about, that idea of transparency. That idea of creating space that people are comfortable enough to say, we didn't do as well as we could do, now let's understand why. The other part of the blog is about us creating a collaborative team where we're pulling everyone, our patients, how we look at onboard and recruit new partners into our organization. And are we really saying that everyone feels inclusive? And I feel that using our continuous improvement methods is one of the most positive ways of helping everyone to feel that I am contributing. I had the amazing opportunity in Alberta to participate in a research study where we were focused in long-term care environment, and our target group was teaching nursing assistants the principles and how to use basic quality improvement tools. And throughout that year of that study, they outpaced any target that we thought was possible, both in improving their work environment, but then also there was a correlation to improving the care for the residents that they took care of. So I think using whether it's lean or any other continuous improvement method is the most available tool for us to begin to help people to feel that I am a part of this environment and all of us together will make it good. I saw with patient advisors and bringing them into the organization in an intentional and meaningful way, how it can change the whole discussion. Just one quick example, putting patient advisors on our medical advisory group had issues with our physicians, leaders sometimes focusing on sometimes what the real issues were. When 2 patient advisors were added to that group, the discussion changed because we all were then focused on what matters to our patients. And then the final part of the blog talks about collaborative working and shared system. In many organizations today, we still have not made sure that our staff, our partners have the capability to do improvement. Many organizations have a few people with labels that they pull out at will to work on a selected improvement project. But when is the time when we will make sure that staff at all levels have the capability to use the knowledge in an effective way? Because that helps us to build that culture of continual learning so that we can drive innovation. So for me, do we have the right mindset? Do we have a shared vision, goals that are deployed throughout the organization? And do we have that team who were building their capabilities so that we can use the knowledge that we have? Mm-hmm. So that's what I tried to provide in my blog.
Debbie, you didn't try. You knocked it out of the park. You did it. You successfully did it. And, and I'm sure as the other panelists, we were all nodding our heads, but specifically when you got to the part and talking about how lean being a tool, that is a tool you can put in everyone's hands. Uh-huh. And a key part of continuous improvement and lean is that reflection where we take that time to look within. And, when we look at doing improvement activities, oftentimes that improvement starts with us looking at within and figuring out what is it that I can do to make a difference and change. And that's another reason why, Ken, it means so much to this series that you're participating. Thank you for being open and sharing your own reflections and lessons learned so freely in your blog, Closing Gaps Within and Without, a leader's reflection on assumption, fear, and taking action habitually. So please share with us an overview about your amazing blog.
Sure, Deondra, thanks. I don't know how amazing, but it was a big challenge because you gave me the task of sort of looking at all these other amazing contributions and then sort of somehow summing up. So I guess maybe I had in the back of my head something that Debbie's walkthrough of her powerful piece just put in my mind again, which was our founding non-executive chairman, Paul O'Neill, and an inspiration for us. He used to say, leadership is all about obligation and nothing about privilege. And realizing the sort of wealth of information about the why and the how that everyone else had put together, I sort of really forced myself to think what might be helpful to leaders besides that, or in addition, or another piece. And the best I came up with was maybe look within and really examine myself and some of our behavior patterns as leaders within value capture that while we're very proud of some of what we achieved on these dimensions, actually held us back from more effective actions, and my responsibility for that. And so I really started there. When you read the blog, you'll see that I sort of describe what I realized around hiring and making sure we sort of had, the basic building block. It's not enough, as Alan said, but we had a group that represented our nation, our customers, our communities fully and tour, particularly with racial diversity. Why we hadn't been more effective for many years. And I sort of identified what I viewed as a sort of two-step reinforcing excuse pattern, which, it may be different for other leaders, but it was sort of an assumption that the level of expert transformation guide that you see before you that had successfully guided these transformations across whole large organizations, that there just would not be many people of color in those ranks, that they would be highly sought after, and that we as a small firm might not be successful. Then sort of call myself out for that was, of course, setting up a hypothesis of we might not be successful. So that then helps undermine sort of the sense that you will be successful, and therefore undermines the action that you take. And then I sort of identified this other sort of tweak to that was even worse, which was to help us feel virtuous despite that, which was to say, well, the cause of that is, of course, systemic racism, and we'll do the best we can to overcome it. But again, just sort of, saying it's somebody else's fault, not our own. And so then I described sort of getting our act together with the shocks of some of what's happened in our society and learning from people like you to sort of just start to take action in a way that's more determined to be successful, and sort of calls us out on that old escape, that own pattern of thought right here, which is particularly serious, as Debbie says, in a leader, and start to take action, and sort of how humbling it is, and sort of makes you want to cry at the same time at just how fast taking action on a different basis started to produce better results. And we have a long way to go. I've got a long way to go in here, but sort of the blog sort of starts there, and then sort of tell other leader stories where I have firsthand expertise within healthcare of other things within that may hold leaders back. And I describe fear of looking at the data deeply enough, looking at yourself, looking at the pattern in your organization deeply enough, out of if you've been the leader or been part of it, and it's not just leaders, it's people you lead, saying, am I going to realize that I was complicit in sort of the product of these systemic forces of non-equity? And that's a bad feeling. And as human beings, we tend to sort of not rush to those places, right? And so then I describe a leader saying, yeah, we may all have been complicit, but we also have the power to change today, right? And to make today a decision when we change. And then, by the way, we can change by applying the ideas we all know how to do, of actually looking at the information, getting the best ideas on the table, and taking action. And I describe our very rapid closing of a very serious equity gap through the pandemic on vaccine distribution within a week, from rapid experimentation and sort of getting beyond that. And then a very large academic health system in our nation using that same experimental cycle to really close the equity gap on process of care and outcomes of care for COVID patients throughout the first 2 years of the pandemic. So, to be hopeful about it, but to having to get over that true fear at the beginning. And then I sort of talk about, well, how do you make it habitual? And some examples I actually saw without healthcare, and Debbie and others have alluded to some of these techniques, Mark, everybody, about how to do it. But an instance where I was really struck of a leader formally appointing people to represent different voices and different traditions, and considering, difficult, challenging, hopeful matters, and sort of how that just changes the conversation without dictating an answer in a way that it sort of reminds me of gratitude practice, of it just sort of shifts where you are in the room in a way that can help people move forward in a better way. And, so then just challenge myself and others to sort of keep acting in the cycle that we know. But to, maybe for a leader, it starts with saying, well, unless we're the best equity leaders for equity ever, and collectively we certainly aren't, what are those patterns within that may have been holding us back, and start there.
And, Ken, that's, again, tying back to what we're talking about with continuous improvement, that cycle, realizing that, this is a journey. These challenges and issues and things that we're bringing up will not be resolved overnight, but it's that continuously seeking improvement, taking that time to reflect, seeing where we are, looking at the data, figuring out what is the next step we can take, what is the next experiment, what is the next thing we need to learn to close whatever gap it is that we've identified in terms of performance, in terms of psychological safety, or wherever the gap is as it relates to what we've been called to do in the healthcare space. Ken, another thing I appreciate about Value Capture is that you continuously offer ways to learn, you offer tools and information for those in healthcare to grow. And so, please tell us about the seminar that's coming up.
Yeah, so one of the things we're so excited to learn with everybody, in part, as Deondra said, one of those sort of learning products that helps us build the depth of relationships and learning community that's necessary to move forward together as mission-focused organizations and people on these issues, is a seminar coming up on June 12th and 13th in South Carolina at one of the campuses for Prisma Health, called Leading with Safety. And you can see the full title there. It's Steps Toward Habitual Excellence, that ties together all of these ideas, from principles to building systems to actually producing the outcomes we're all talking about, as an integrated whole, right? Not safety over here, equity over here, quality outcomes over here, financial performance over here, but what does it look like, and what does it take for leaders to both, have that aligned vision, that aspirational aligned vision, the clear goals, and then move everyone together, recognizing it's one flow of care and people, right, to get there. And it's an exciting opportunity, for leaders. And by the way, this, and again, I'm going to cite Debbie, but other colleagues have said it, this is really for C-suite operations leaders to recognize you are responsible, and this has to be carried through you. So this is really not for the improvement community, assigned person or the equity assigned person. We know what to do, right? This is for the C-suite leaders to sort of see an example of it flowing all the way through together with simplicity and power at an exciting site where 9 months in, a new leader has them moving dramatically forward on multiple metrics at once, still very much in formation. And it's a powerful seminar. We've run it many times with Paul O'Neill Sr. And then after we lost him 3 years ago, now we continue to do it with other leaders, other voices, and the chance to go see the real work and the real people doing the work. So if that's intriguing enough to you, look at the information in the chat, and get some C-suite, come as a C-suite leader, or get your C-suite leaders to come. We still have a few slots available, and it's a nice opportunity to learn with your peers about these ideas and see them coming together with all the struggles, as well as the excitement.
Perfect. Mark, thank you so much for putting the link in the chat. And again, that seminar, the title is Leading with Safety, Accelerating Towards Habitual Excellence. And it's an executive seminar, and it's scheduled for June 12th through the 13th. So for those who are receiving the recording, you'll also get information about how to register for that seminar. Mark, I see that we have 2 questions in the Q&A, and I'd like to get to those before each of the blog authors, close out with their final thoughts.
Yes, thanks, Deondra. And there's one that I captured from the chat that I'm going to answer as a question as well. There's a question from Jeff. It's a long question. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste the whole thing into the chat. But I think the summary of the question is asking, is it really possible to achieve patient care and access equity when health systems oversupply services? For example, admitting patients that could be treated as well or better at home. It's a provocative statement, but an important question. How can we talk about perfection when we have so many hardwired, perverse financial incentives driving leadership positions? Big, important question. Ken?
I can take a first crack, but I'm eager for others, and appreciate Jeff Teed's question. And Jeff is a leader who vibrates and accomplishes a lot with these ideas. I think it's a reminder that lean is not really just a set of tools. Lean is a philosophy, and it starts with respect for the individual and customer need, right? And so if we're trying to think deeply about what the true need of the customer is, which is really not just the patient, but the person, all of us in community and staying healthy, where would we start and how would we array all of this? And, we could, improve the design of our system to make equity, among other, and safety and psychological safety a much more likely outcome, right? Vicki Peisowitz, another of our colleagues, calls it crossing healthcare's intractable silos. But again, I think it's a reminder that this is a philosophy that can take you to the powerful places that Jeff's question asks us to.
Anybody else with some thoughts on that important question?
If I may, I just wanted to add to what Ken just said, and I agree with him 100%, that this is a philosophy, but it's also, from a leadership standpoint, creating the conditions where people can see that zero is possible. And if you can't create those conditions, you'll never get there. And I believe that it is leadership's responsibility to create the conditions where people can see that zero is possible and that people can actually thrive. And when they have these interactions with patients, that each touch is a healing interaction when they go in and meet with a patient. So.
Great. Let me throw out another question here. Merdad asked, so Mark made a great point about fear of retaliation. Could this be a reason why, despite multiple initiatives, wrongful deaths and injuries continue to rise significantly? I have thoughts, but let me let others in the panel go first. If I see you all thinking, I know you all have thoughts. Gerald.
If I could take the first swing at that. So this is where I think psychological safety and respect for people actually play a crucial role in improving patient safety and staff engagement. And as I even peeked in the chat, I saw someone else refer to a death actually happening, and they blamed it on COVID. And but the patient had actually complained about not being treated properly. And so this is where psychological safety would create an environment where individuals feel free to speak up and share ideas, express their concerns without fear of negative consequences. And in such an environment, professionals are more likely to be proactive and identify those types of things before they actually happen. So I just wonder, and the question I would have back to you is, had those conditions been available, would we be talking about that incident in the way we are today?
Thank you, Gerald. And
I'll add, Mark. So to me, anytime when we see the word retaliation within our individual organizations, because the person who wrote it is most likely not the only organization, is globally, that's a point to stop and be reflective, because the key to creating an environment where people feel safe to take the veil off is really, are we switching to a learning culture where when something goes wrong, we have an active process to have a conversation about what do we know, what are the opportunities, and then together we make the changes that are necessary. And it's again back to leaders and at all levels, because at the point when something happens is not really the CEO has a responsibility with helping to create the condition, but that's where our frontline leaders have to feel supported and ready with action, because that immediate response is what says to staff, it's okay. And once we do that, and we have many more reps, you suddenly find that your good catch or near miss numbers starts to escalate, because they're like, okay, yes, we can speak up, because as an organization, we want to learn to create a safer space for our patients and our staff.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I was just going to add one thought around a culture of improvement. I think there's two things that are required. They both start with PS, as it turns out: psychological safety and problem solving. Or at least those are two words that we could use, right? Because if all we do is make it safe for people to speak up, and we're being non-punitive, and people are reporting the same problems over and over again, we're not really getting very far. And then that's when the futility factor creeps in. We've eliminated fear. We don't want to replace it with futility. We really need both of those things going together.
Mark, I like that PS, psychological safety and problem solving. That's good. I think that could be on a t-shirt. The two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And if I can add another PS. So, overall, we have a few more minutes left in this webinar. We want to ensure that we wrap up at the bottom of the hour. And so an additional PS that we want to leave everyone with is from each of the blog authors. We'll do sort of a lightning round here where we'll go in order that the blogs were posted, and you'll leave your PS. What is, something related to psychological safety and problem solving in a minute or less that you want people to know about as a takeaway from your blog? And keep in mind, for those who are watching, this will be shared with you, what they're saying, and some will be included in the infographic that's shared. So we'll go in order that the blogs were written. So Mark, give us your 1 minute PS.
All right, I will do that. And we have a couple of questions we didn't get to. If we can be lightning enough, maybe we can address them at the end, or we will find a way of addressing those questions in a written or recorded format. So key takeaway: ignoring a problem or saying that it's somehow unsolvable doesn't improve anything. Ken demonstrated this in his blog post so well. Instead of saying things like, well, that's not fixable, or that's how it is, we can say instead, we haven't figured out how to solve it yet. So we can aim for zero harm. I'm wearing intentionally my zero hat today from the Patient Safety Movement Foundation. Zero patient harm, zero employee harm, and beyond physical harm, we can aim for zero emotional harm that's caused by disrespect or discrimination. That can be our goal. It doesn't mean we're going to get there tomorrow, but that's the only goal worth working toward. So my call to action back to psychological safety to leaders is, to please start modeling these vulnerable acts. These things are generally less risky or less vulnerable the higher you are in an organization. So when you can admit when you don't know, admit when you were wrong, talk candidly about safety risks and harm, that sets an example and gives cover for others to speak with more candor. And then we make sure those people are rewarded for their candor instead of being punished. That's the call to action I would hope to see more of.
Thank you, Mark. Gerald?
So as we really explored the importance of respecting every individual and psychological safety, my call to action would be to reflect on your own role. Look inside, because it all starts with us as individuals. And so consider how you can contribute to creating a culture of safety and inclusion in your own setting. Assess your own biases. And that's hard, but we need to look inside and see where we have blind spots, actively listen to others, and challenge the status quo whenever necessary. And remember, positive change starts with each individual.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alan?
So my key takeaway is that speak up campaigns are largely ineffective for coaxing staff and patients to report errors and risks due to a culture of fear in work units with low psychological safety. Therefore, healthcare organizations need to commit to cultivating a culture of psychological safety in which they feel safe to report healthcare errors and risks that harm patients, visitors, staff, and contractors.
Thank you, Alan. Debbie?
My takeaway, make safety, development of an inclusive culture personal. For leaders, start by assessing your current harm reduction practices. Where are you now? What are the opportunities for you and your team to move forward? And then know what is the knowledge and capability level of your team to make the required changes. To the rest of the healthcare team, we pick up the baton. We educate ourselves about the evidence-based practices that can reduce harm and promote an environment of equity. And we strive to put that into our day-to-day work, not perfection, but that continuous improvement every day, a little bit better.
Thank you, Debbie. Ken?
So I had a key learning that I just want to offer that, my actions are based on, which are, that for leaders, many of the constructs in our heads are that hold us back from taking more meaningful action are actually not supported by the evidence. And so have the courage to sort of do that uncomfortable reflection on what those patterns might be, and then take action in the form of trusting the process, plan, do, study, adjust, and trust the learnings that will emerge, and trust your people and trust yourself. So let's, get going.
Thank you. And from my takeaway and a point that I want to share, what Debbie said, make it personal. See yourself in these different spaces where patients are. See walk in the footsteps of those you lead, and revisit or develop your organization's strategic plan. And when you get to the step where you need to determine priorities and objectives, ask yourself this question and thoroughly explore it. What are we trying to accomplish when it comes to treating staff and patients with respect and cultivating psychologically safe spaces without regard to race, religion, work status, education, or any other distinguishing characteristics? And again, make it personal. Mm-hmm. So, we do have some time for questions. Mm-hmm. And Mark, please ask those.
Yeah, we've got two more. As with the others, they are weighty, important questions. First off, I want to point people toward Deondra's blog post, because she is playing host extraordinaire today, but she was also a great contributor to this blog series, an opportunity to tap into her knowledge on not just continuous improvement topics, but also her root cause racism series and project. And so I just want to encourage people. I feel like we're missing out a little bit on some of your expertise and perspectives because you're hosting. So I hope people will go check out the blog post that you wrote and your website. So there's a question here. How do health systems apply the concept of psychological safety when there are external factors? For example, when harm occurs, it's typically not spoken of outside because there's fear of litigation. How do we continue to influence other large healthcare stakeholders, such as regulators, policymakers, I would add payers, to create more psychologically safe ways for organizations to be transparent about harm and the learnings from those events? Ken, can I invite you to add some thoughts? Because the previous panel webinar, I think, addresses a lot of this about a proposal that's important to you, if you want to share about that.
So Yes. And, obviously there are lots of factors in the healthcare environment that I want to say we have allowed to hold us back from more effective action to make things safer for everyone and more equitable for everyone. And part of trying to address those is to recognize, Alan outlined, the lack of overall progress in 20 years. And we need a change to more of a international learning culture, as Debbie said, that's real. That's not just a set of disparate activities, often held within and not very effective within individual institutions and spread. So there's a movement to create a national patient safety authority that would bring together some of the key behaviors and learning systems and hold ourselves more accountable to use it to learn effectively to prevent harm that's underway. And you can look that up. Other webinars, as Mark said, it's a bill that's been introduced in Congress. But I do also just want to add, I think, the real powerful examples are those leaders and institutions that say, despite all that noise, we believe leading to make things safer, including being transparent about harm and how we're solving it and how we're trying to support our people through it, they actually get sued less, not more. All of those things. It's just an example of leadership to do the right thing despite all that. And then people tend to respond in the right way when that happens. So I think that's another pattern in our head of excuses that we use way too much in healthcare. And we need to start by just taking action. And then while we're working on that national, more supportive environment. But if we wait for that before we do the right thing, we'll be here 20 more years.
Yeah, thank you. And I've put a link in the chat. I'll make sure the webinar recording page for this panel webinar has a link to the one from January with Ken and others sharing more about that National Patient Safety Board concept. But back to the question about some of the challenges or the lack of societal psychological safety in addressing these issues. Does anyone else have some thoughts or ideas to share on that?
Well, Mark, I would like to hear your thoughts, especially from the standpoint of how you talked about hierarchies, and then even what we do with these blog series where, we have people represented from different areas and all over the globe coming together, having a conversation about what is it we're trying to address and how do we go about addressing that in a real and meaningful way with action steps.
I saw many thoughts around that in the original question. I mean, we have people attending from many countries, and we look just not at data, but stories from other countries of how similar the stories are. It only points to how systemic the challenges are, even with differences on some levels about private versus public and single payer versus insurance models. The same things tend to happen. I shared a story on LinkedIn from New Zealand. Thanks to the internet, these stories then spread of something that could have happened here in the US, of nurses, not just a nurse, but multiple nurses giving the wrong medication to an elderly patient, arguably killed that patient. And, one of the nurses was distraught and it seemed like left the field. Another one was sent to, I'm going to try to say this calmly, was sent to education about medical errors. We need to stop blaming individuals who are being set up to fail in bad systems, and we have to stop thinking that education or re-education for the frontline workers is the solution. So it's back to these higher level societal questions around, looking for vengeance instead of justice, looking for retribution instead of improvement, or being satisfied with that, right? At what point does society say prosecuting nurses for being involved in a systemic error is beyond unjust? It's counterproductive. It's going to lead to more errors down the road. I don't know the solutions. It's going to take a lot of people trying to influence the public to not be satisfied with the blame game and throwing an individual under the bus and saying, oh, okay, yeah, it's safe now. That's just, it's not accurate and it's not helpful.
You know, Mark, not to oversimplify this, and I even talked about this in my blog, it's not lost on me how heavy this lift is and what all is involved, especially when we look at staff and patient safety from a global perspective. But, you know, it goes back to what we've all been talking about, and this is why it's so important to link continuous improvement in this. It's systematic, it's a system, it's systemic, it's processes. And too oftentimes, and we see this in a number of industries, when there is an escape or when there's a miss or when there's a mistake, we want to blame an individual. And the first person we want to do is send that person to training. Well, what are you training them on? You know, instead of taking the time to be able to put your finger on, aha, this is what's causing the issue. What can we do to change this system to prevent it from happening? And so, you know, it goes back to what we've been talking about, is getting to the root cause of why these things exist, and then having some real honest, open conversations about what we can do to make those improvements. Debbie, I see your hand.
So it's adding to what Mark said. It's more of that storytelling and finding examples from a community perspective. So really quick, summarize something that happened in Alberta. So not sharing any secrets. It was publicly shared. Basically, a patient died during treatment for cancer for a diagnosis that, to the best of all the knowledge that we have, the resources we have, that patient should have survived that particular diagnosis. The bottom line is that the way it was handled when they made the public announcement about the patient passing, the family stood with the lead physician, public discussion, and said why they still had faith in the cancer system, because the leadership took the time to explain what happened very transparently and what they were doing to amend, to problem solve. And so I think us really getting better at connecting globally and continuing to share those examples of what the behaviors could be like, and then challenging each other, because every event builds confidence. And so I think sharing stories across hospital lines or across healthcare system lines and across boundaries will help us, for society, to even understand why harm occurs, what are the vulnerabilities in the system. So us engaging the community more, us engaging patients more, I think it's a big opportunity that we have truly not grappled with.
Yeah.
You know, we have 3 minutes left. We could go on, I'm sure, and talk another 90 minutes, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time. This has been an amazing discussion from beginning to end, with the interaction with the blogs, the comments on social media, and definitely the input that's been shared here. And we do realize, Mark, I did see that you responded to Ashley that there will be a follow-up on the question. We don't want to leave anyone's question overlooked, but like I said, we want to be respectful of the time. We thank you so much to everyone who joined us. Thank you to everyone who participated in the series, and to Ken, to you and the Value Capture team. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your collaboration and your partnership, your support, and your friendship. And we'll turn it over to you for final words.
Well, thanks, Deondra, and I think all of us at Value Capture and our fellow panelists and everyone who joined us, we're just so excited. But to thank you, because as a transformative leader, you have a voice that brings a simple, powerful, reinforcing framework that sort of accelerates improvement and achievement based on values, and achievements that help us all be more of who we want to be at the end of the day, right? As individuals and as leaders, personally and professionally. And this is the core work that the principles call us to do, right? Based on respect for every individual. And then, it's up to each of us to sort of be inspired by you and by each other, doing the hard work, as Debbie challenged us to do. It's, to continue to listen and accelerate our actions and learning together in a growing community that's achieving better outcomes. So just thank you all. So let's just say on to more action together and a more tightly connected, an expanded learning community that supports really transformative change on these problems that are the ones that really bother us, as Americans, as North Americans, as individuals. The only thing that's holding us back is us. So let's use the methods and be inspired by these other voices here. And Deondra, your sort of packaging of all this, Mark, your special help, these extraordinary voices of Alan and Debbie and Gerald, Bill, your help, and everyone joining us today. Can't wait to learn and take action with all of you in an expanded way after this.